Hello, it's David Leroy here, and today I'm going to present a research paper originally presented at the American Psychology Law Society conference in March 2004. The focus of the presentation today is on how the phenomenon known as reminiscence and hypermnesia can help in our understanding of repeatedly interviewing children. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the help I've received from colleagues in conducting this research, as well as the parents, teachers, and children of the Otago schools that made the study possible. Hypermnesia is essentially the opposite of forgetting, and it's a term used to describe increases in recall across successive recall attempts. For hypermnesia to occur, these successive recall attempts must, by definition, include new information that was not previously reported. The term reminiscence refers to this newly recalled information, and the key to understanding the concepts of reminiscence and hypermnesia is realizing that every time we try to recall things about the past, we recall them differently. Sometimes we forget things we once remembered, and sometimes we recall new pieces of information for the first time. Laboratory studies, for example, have shown that reminiscence and hypermnesia occur when children or adults view a set of pictures or words and then go about recalling them 3 times in a row, taking a break of a few minutes in between each recall attempt. What the data shows is that across each recall attempt, the total amount of information progressively increases. A handful of studies have examined whether hypermnesia occurs in adult eyewitness recall. Typically, the participants would view a video clip and then go about recalling what they've seen 3 times in a row. And these studies have been found that adults provide a progressively greater amount of information across successive recall attempts. And the obvious benefit of reminiscence and hypermnesia from a forensic perspective is that there may be more leads to follow up, as well as potentially new evidence obtained in subsequent interviews. So our research questions were, do reminiscence and hypermnesia occur in children's eyewitness memory? And are there advantages of repeatedly interviewing children about past events? The 2 studies that I'll present you today tested children's memory for an analogue event. The children were 5 and 6 years old when they individually visited a pirate during school time, and they completed a number of fun activities which included using a map that they'd made to find some treasure. The children were interviewed twice about what they could remember about the pirate with a 24-hour delay between the interviews. We wanted to use not only an ecologically valid event, but also a time frame that was ecologically valid too. Each interview began with an open invitation to tell the interviewer everything that they could remember. For example, can you tell me everything you remember about your visit to the pirate? Following this free recall attempt, there were 4 open prompts that were then used. For example, I heard that you had to find some treasure. Tell me about that. The number of correct items of information recalled and the numbers of errors formed the basis of our analyses. The difference between the 2 studies was the timing of the interviews. In study 1, the children were interviewed immediately after the event, as well as receiving a second interview 24 hours later. In study 2, the children were interviewed 2 times, separated by 24 hours, but their initial and repeated interview occurred after a 6-month delay. You'll see that the participants in study 2 also received an immediate interview after their participation in the event. This was so forgetting could be demonstrated across the 6-month delay, but I'm going to omit these data from today's presentation. So the data I'm going to present here in this presentation are the ones that are now highlighted. First of all, did we find hypermnesia? Evidence of hypermnesia would be more information reported in a second interview compared to the first interview in each study. The figure shows that recall increased between the initial and repeated interviews in both studies. However, the increase in recall was only statistically significant in Study 1. It would appear then, at face value, that the greatest benefit of repeated interviewing is within 24 hours of the event. Of course, repeated interviewing as a means to elicit greater amounts of information would be of little value if it caused a simultaneous increase in errors and a decrease in accuracy. When I examined the numbers of errors, I found that they did not increase across the repeated interviews in studies 1 or 2. And the recall accuracy remained largely unchanged across the repeated interviews in both studies. So what are the necessary conditions for hypermnesia? Why did we get more hypermnesia in Study 1 but not Study 2? One possibility is that children in Study 1 recalled more new information than those in Study 2. Alternatively, the children in Study 1 may have repeated more information across the interviews. From a forensic perspective, the question becomes, does the increase in recall rely on increased consistency across interviews, i.e. repeated information, or because new details were elicited, i.e. reminiscence? To examine whether hypermnesia depended on the difference in the amount of new information, I compared the proportion of new information added to the second interview in each study, and the figure shows that children reminisced more new information in Study 1. When I compared the proportion of repeated information from the first to the second interview, I found that there was no statistical difference. It would appear that the difference between these studies lies with the proportion of new information added in the second interview. But is this new information accurate? As already stated, any benefits to recall must be weighed against the possible negative effects, and new information added to children's accounts has been found to be unreliable in some previous studies. People tend to construe new information as inaccurate because we often reason that if what you're saying was true, why didn't you tell it to me the first time that you were asked? To my great satisfaction, I found that the accuracy of new information was the highest in Study 1. It was 91%. I also discovered that the accuracy of repeated information was the greatest in Study 1. So what conclusions can we draw about repeated interviewing of child eyewitnesses? First of all, repeated interviewing only caused hypermnesia in Study 1, and the hypermnesia was due to the recall of new information. Repeated interviewing did not cause an increase in errors or a decrease in accuracy. So there are few costs associated with repeating a non-leading open-ended interview. And understanding reminiscence and hypermnesia is important, as children rarely disclose abuse soon after an event, and we need to understand the ways that we can access these memories after a long time has elapsed.